San Francisco 5 years ago. And again, I almost didn't come back. I threatened my husband that we were not coming back. Yes, it was
Until
fun.
you see the home prices, then you'll be running
Oh,
away.
see,
So.
that shut me up really quickly. I think we might be live. Yes, we are.
Yes, we
We
are.
are
Okay.
live. I'm going to switch over. Hi, everyone. This is Faiza. Thank you for joining us. I am here with David Richards today.
Hello, hello.
And
So great to be here.
so great, so great. I am so excited. I am lighting up. This is a subject I feel so passionate about, and many people that know me know how passionate I am about education and children. So this is near and dear to my heart. Welcome, David. So
Thank you so much.
let's rock and roll.
Yes, I love it.
Yes.
So excited to be here. So excited. I feel like this is the first time, or not the first time, the second time I've been in a space with you that's not like on a camera, but I feel like we're like best friends because I read your posts and I'm like, yes, yes, she knows, she gets it. I need to talk to her a lot. So I'm so excited to be here.
This is what happens when spirits connect.
Yes.
And I tell people that energy is so important. You have to know,
Yes.
and I joke, maybe I'm not joking, that I'm at an age of my life where I know what I want, I know where I need to be, and I know who I need to be around.
Yes. That's
So
such
I
a,
feel like we feel the energy.
yes. Yes, such a concise way to say it.
Awesome. So I am coming live from North Carolina. So hi, everyone, in this vibrant room. Look how bright and colorful it is, as David mentioned before. And
Yes.
that really ties into what we're talking about today, color and living authentically and really connecting. This brings me to education. So as you join us, I'm giving everyone a minute with the small talk, is that I met David through Dr. Shafali's work. And I actually think we might have met at Evolve, David.
Oh, did we? Okay.
I was trying to piece it together, and I think we met. I think we met at
Okay.
not the last Evolve,
Cool.
the one before.
Oh, awesome. Well,
so
I've known you for thousands of years, but it's great that we met in this life.
So David wears a lot of hats in the space of education. He's an educator. He's a dadpreneur, as he'll say, an entrepreneur. I'll call him. David is an educator. You've taught in high school. You've started your own school. You've been a principal, and now we're navigating COVID, and I call it the two pandemics, which is the racial awakening that our country is dealing with right now, and the pandemic that is really truly almost defining or trying to define how we live. But the purpose of this collaboration right now is that we're not going to have COVID define. We're going to look at the opportunities that that COVID is providing us as parents, teachers, and educators. So if you're joining us, David, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did this passion for education come from for you, and how did you get started on not just questioning the status quo, which is what we have in education today, but to have this vision to come up with an education that actually matches what our children need?
Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the screen. Sorry. Yes. So first of all, I live for these moments. I have definitely throughout my life always done some version of a startup. And originally it was by accident. Like I like to tell the story about how my first job, well, my second job when I was in high school was at the first Blockbuster Video in my town. It was like 1993, and it was like the new thing, Blockbuster Video. But I started that from scratch. So like I was on the team that started it from scratch. So it was super fun. So throughout my whole, when you do your life coaching and stuff, you kind of go back through your life as I've worked with coaches, and it's always been some version of a startup. So what I've learned about my authentic self, my true nature, is that I love to tackle really big, juicy problems. And I naturally can see things from a different angle. So, if someone's talking about X, Y, and Z, I'm always seeing like a completely different vision of what that could be. And as I've gone through the work on myself and kind of detangling the false self, I'm like, oh, I am a visionary. But for the longest time, I was like, oh, I'm not a visionary. But so my passion for education really, as always, is related to my own journey as a student. And I ended up, my parents so I grew up with in a very dysfunctional kind of situation in a lot of ways. But one thing my parents did really well, They got divorced when I was about 7, but one thing they did really well is that they would find the neighborhoods where they could afford to rent an apartment in the nice neighborhoods, which seems great. But what I've learned as an educator and through the research is sometimes that's the worst thing you can do for a low-income child, is to put them into an affluent school. Sometimes it's great, but sometimes the social stigma and the inability of the teachers to understand the child is actually worse than just throwing them into a mediocre school, right? So that was my experience, is that a lot of the false self that I've been untangling has come through the school system, in that I was always the poor kid, I was always the dirty kid, I was pretty smart, you know, I was good at school, but I had no interest in it because no one ever took an interest in me. So I was just I could hide. I was a professional hider. You know, I would just kind of fly under the radar. And I told this story to someone else who interviewed me. And my whole entire time in an affluent Southern California public school district, not one time did a teacher take an interest in me. The whole entire time. The closest I ever got was my basketball coach, because I was good at basketball, and he was interested in me because I was good at basketball. But never did he ask me like, hey, I noticed that, you know, you don't have shoes that work. Can I help you? You know, anything like that. There was never an adult that took an interest in me. So I'm not saying that's the way it is at every school, but that's what really fired me up about education reform. So then when I went to high school, again, slid under the radar. I wouldn't have graduated if it wasn't for basketball. Basketball was the thing that made me go to school every day, because if I didn't have, you know, at least a 2.0, I couldn't play. So basketball kind of saved me. I'm a really big sports fan. I coach basketball now. And it saved me because it allowed me to go to school. But when I got my final transcript, I did graduate, and I had actually missed a whole year of school, because you know, the number of days it says on your final transcript. I had missed a whole year. I had missed 200 days of school in my 4 years of high school, because nobody ever asked me where I was. I would just not show up. And then I could show up 1 day a week, 2 days a week, and just in 5 minutes learn everything the teacher was teaching, because it was taught to the middle, and it wasn't very mediocre expectations. And again, very good school district, affluent neighborhood. I'll tell you about when I get into the urban schools and I realize that it's even more complicated, but so I could just slide by. And then I grew up in Santa Barbara, which has a beautiful community college. So about half the seniors will go there because they don't know what else to do. So I just did what everyone else did, and I went to community college. And then I got there and I realized that I didn't really know anything in terms of an academic. Like, I knew a lot about life, let me tell you. I left my house before I even graduated. I've been supporting myself since I was 17. Like, I knew a lot about life, but I didn't know how to write an essay. My reading level was not very good. And so I had what I call the GED equivalent of a high school diploma, again, in a very good district.
Yes.
and then the kind of angry inner child version of me was like pretty pissed off about it, because I got to community college and I realized that I didn't know anything. And my first essay was a D-, my first midterm was an F. And I was like, wait, I'm smart. Like, I get B's and I don't do anything. What's happening here? I have to actually learn. So I spent almost 4 years in community college redoing high school.
Wow.
And I was really committed. And this is when I started really tapping into my intuition without knowing it, as I had this intuitive feeling that if I could get into a good college, I could change my life. It's like, I think this is the way I can change my life. I can get myself out of poverty by going to a great college. And honestly, my dad's an entrepreneur. He left, he's British, and he left school when he was 14. He's severely dyslexic. My whole family's dyslexic, so that's another passion that I have around different types of learners. And he's very anti-intellectual, anti-college, anti-school. He's like, why do you need to go to school? Just go start a business. But so I had to kind of go against the tides of my family and, you know, get an education, like a formal education. So I committed the day when I got that first F, I committed to, I'm going to transfer to a prestigious university and I'm going to graduate with honors. I did. So I went to UC Berkeley, and I ended up graduating with honors with a history degree. I love history because I love people. And then kind of went through my 20s, not sure what I wanted to do. And then when I turned 30, decided that I wanted to be a teacher. So I had this perfect job 1 block from the White House, working at a corporate bank, and I was completely miserable. So I decided to follow the tug. Now I have the language. I obeyed the intuitive tug, and I was like, I have to go to grad school to be a teacher. But I was too scared to be a normal teacher or to go to a normal teaching program, because I was worried that I would have to repeat and go into a system that didn't work for me. So I applied to Stanford University because they had a credentialing program where you could get certified and also a master's degree. So I was like, well, if I decide that I don't want to be a broke teacher in a broken system, maybe I'll have another option. So I went to Stanford, and then that completely changed my life because I realized that I loved teaching. And the original goal of going to Stanford was to actually figure out, to try and change education. Because what I realized intuitively when I was in Washington, D.C. is that a lot of people were talking about changing education and they'd never been in a classroom. And again, it's common sense, but also intuition. I was like, I don't actually respect the people that I'm reading about that are doing policy work in DC because they've never been in a classroom, they've never worked in the trenches. So I was like, I just got to go be a teacher, and then I'm going to change education from the inside out.
Inside out,
and then that was really, I was like, I'll be a teacher for a year or two so people have credibility. That was the conditioning and the, I'm too good to be a public school teacher. I went to Stanford. And then I went to teach, and I was like, whoa, I love these kids. I'm dying. I'm so alive. And I would say the most alive I've ever been in my whole life was the 7 years I was working with high school kids. I loved every second of it, no resistance. And anyway, that's a lot. I could go on.
Really the age where they're actually defying a lot of the things we've conditioned them to think.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that collision of here's David with all his life experiences from being a kid who wasn't seen, wasn't heard, like a lot of us.
Yeah.
And now you are jiving with these teenagers who are not listening to their parents, but they have someone who gets them.
Oh, I love teenagers. I love them because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. They're trying to figure out the world. They're still tapped in enough to their source because they haven't been totally talked out of it yet.
Yeah.
They're still trying to figure it out. But they're
There's
just
hope.
Open.
A little hope.
A little hope, and they're open, and they're super fun, and they're kind of crazy. They love to take risks. And so I enjoyed every moment. And then the other thing I really wanted to highlight, and I appreciate about one of the reasons I was attracted to your page and your post, is that with this, I love how you're calling the second pandemic around the racial injustice, is that I had actually, interestingly enough, did not have a white friend until I was 21 years old. So I had always grown up in communities of color as the other. I was always the white guy that made fun of me. And so I have a lot of, I just understand what it's like. So my friends growing up, I would experience racism through them. We'd go to a store and they'd be chased out. The police would be called, they would treat me totally different. One time, we were walking down the street and they just ignored me. And, I don't need to tell the stories. People that are people of color know what I'm talking about. So that's a big part of my mission, is trying to figure out how do we create equity within a system that is actually created to not have equity. And, going to community college and then seeing that most of the kids that were going there were kids of color that I was in classes with, because my classes, the other thing I learned, this is why I got angry before I started doing the spiritual work, and now I can just talk about it neutrally, is that you're not really told how the high school system works unless you have the social capital and kind of are part of the dominant, typically white dominant culture, where you understand that you have to take certain courses to get into college. Yeah. So a lot of my friends were taking the English learner classes or taking kind of the remedial courses, and that's what I would take because those were my friends. I didn't know that I was in a massively racist system, but I'd be the only white kid in the class, and I don't really think anything of it because that was my whole childhood. And then when I got to Berkeley and Stanford, I realized that it was the opposite, that majority of the kids around me were coming from affluent backgrounds and they were white middle class kids. And then I would make friends with the 2% that were coming from East LA and different places, and the first generation college students. And the story was the same. It's one person cared about me. There was a nonprofit that put me into a different school. My friend from South Central, I took a bus for 2 hours to downtown LA. They all had the same story, which was one person helped them, and that helped them get out. But it wasn't a systemic.
It wasn't a systemic. It wasn't something recognized as, hey, we have a deficiency here. Let's work with it. This reminds me of a post by a dear friend of mine, actually on my page yesterday. And I was really, I think I said I was horrified to read it. Looking back, 24 hours later, am I really horrified? No, it's a deficiency. When people look at systemic racism as a mindset, as a message that we're pushing, as a narrative that's being put out there, meaning it's not really real or happening, we're denying an experience that is not only valid, but unfolds every single day in America.
Yep. And every system is built to perpetuate it.
Yes, specifically young America. And I think what your story, I think what your background now is bringing even to the awareness even more, is that it's not just Black kids actually that are affected. It is any child. It's any young David, you know, any David that was in that situation that you were in would be absolutely not only dismissed, but failed by the system.
Absolutely. But I had the benefit of looking the way I look. So I tell the story about how, you know, when I worked as a bank teller after Blockbuster. That's how I supported myself through college, and was like just working at the bank and getting financial aid. And they would immediately say to me, "Oh, when do you want to be the manager?" And I'd be like, "What?" So they just assumed based on the fact. And then when I graduated from college, this is so funny, again, not knowing that there was this white dominant culture that I could totally take advantage of, I actually applied for like receptionist jobs, because I just assumed that's what I should do. Like, don't you start at the bottom, you know? And they would interview me and they'd be so perplexed to be like, and a lot of them would be intimidated. A lot of times with women that had, you know, made it to a certain level and they were able to hire their assistant or whatever. And they'd be like, "Well, we're really intrigued by your resume." But then they talk to me and they'd be like, kind of sideways looking at me like, this just doesn't seem right. So it was, as I've gotten older, I realized that I think the class argument is a way to distract from the real thing that's happening.
From the real problem, correct.
Yeah, but I don't disagree with you. I do think my ability to really understand, because I have the class issue, and because it's also, there's obviously a systemic issue around class, but because I spent so much time with people of color as a child, that I almost, and I was basically adopted by a Mexican family, so I speak Spanish, and I always say, they'd call me their quinto hijo, and like their fifth child, and I always say like I'm Mexican in corazón, like in my heart I'm Mexican. So I kind of can understand. And then when I got to, and you know, when it really hit me was when I got to Oakland. So after Stanford, I fell in love with my student teaching assignment, which was in a low-income school, and the kids would say to me, like, they'd look at me and they wouldn't trust me, because they'd be like, Stanford, white guy, you know, who you're going to be like the rest of them. And then eventually we'd build a relationship and they'd be like, "There's something different about you." And then I explained to them, "Oh, I grew up in the Mexican." "Oh, okay, we get it now. I grew up poor." "Oh, okay, that's why we like you."
You're a global, you're a child of the universe. I really, truly was too. I wasn't raised by my family, but I was raised by a village. It was my grandmother and her sister, and you know, and my uncles and my aunts, and even the same. You know, I didn't grow up wealthy, and I know exactly what it's like not to have a meal on the table.
Yes, me too.
So, you know, so I think that when we grow up that way, I truly feel like it just makes you a different person. You cannot afford, I think something about our collective being does not allow us to view the world asleep. Like, you can't be sheep anymore. You have to open your eyes and say, there is more, and we can be better. And how do we become better? Absolutely. Which helps me kind of get into this next stage of, so this is David, and you've got your experience, you've got your education. You still don't feel worthy, but you've got your education. And at some point, David wakes up and says, "I loved working with these kids so much. I'm inspired by these kids, but we can do things differently." So how did that, you know, how did that go into you now starting your own schools? And how did you set that up, and what was the main goal?
Yes. Okay. So I could talk about this stuff forever. So thank you for just.
No, it's great.
I'll just sit back and.
I want everyone to get as much of you as possible. We might need a series, David.
Okay. So I graduate from UC Berkeley. I think I'm like hot stuff. And I realized that I feel like, oh, I can get anything I want. I got, you know, 4.0 from Berkeley. And I really was on top of the world, and then nobody would give me a job. And eventually I found a job, an entry-level job, and I went to, I worked in San Francisco for a year in a PR company, like at the bottom, like I was literally at the bottom of the 40th, like the first floor in a 40-floor building. And I was just processing the bills. And but then they sent me to London, which was huge, because then I got to start their finance office in London, which is hilarious because I'm not actually good at numbers, but I was able to start their office. And so throughout my 20s, I believed that I should be doing something that I wasn't doing, which is I was conditioned, right? And so what I kept feeling throughout all of my 20s was that I needed to change education. So what ended up happening was I went to Oakland, like I said, and fell in love with the kids. Like, honestly, I could spend all day, every day with those kids. And it was really irritating because every time I tell somebody I'm working in Oakland, they would say, oh, that must be, oh gosh, you're a glutton for punishment. And there would be like all these kind of undertones. And I'd be like, oh, let me just be really clear with you. The kids are amazing, the adults are terrible. That's it. So I'm like, let's change. When you say, I'm like, when you say Oakland, when you say Oakland is so terrible, please be clear that the people are beautiful, the system is broken, and the adults in the system are struggling. And then they project that onto the kids. Like, let's just get this clear. But so when I was in Oakland, I really felt like it just isn't working. Like this huge urban school. So like I said, I grew up in a suburban district. Then I go to an urban district where all the kids are like me in terms of where the backgrounds are coming from. And I'm seeing such low expectations, very, very low expectations. And a lot of the teachers speaking about the kids in a certain way. And I'm just like, just dying inside. Like, this is not, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. I love the kids, but I'm just, my soul is dying here. And the universe is very precise. So I ended up finding a charter school, not actually on the other side of the bay, like an hour drive. So for 5 years, I commuted from Oakland to Redwood City, which is anyone in the San Francisco Bay Area, that's like 4 hours in a car to do that. So people would be like, you're driving 4 hours a day to make $37,000. And I'm like, yes, because I'm not leaving Oakland, one, and two, because I believe in this school so much. So I started at this small charter school. It's now nationally ranked. It's called Summit Public Schools. I basically grew with them. I was a teacher for 7 years, then I was a principal, then I was the executive director of the schools in San Jose, and then I became the chief schools officer. So in about 9-10 years, I had like made it. And again, I was totally miserable because I was disconnected from the kids, and I felt like I was just back at the bank in this like central corporate office, and it wasn't about the kids anymore. It was about the facilities and the budget and all that. And so at that point, I was about to turn 40, and I decided that I was going to go start my own school and like take a huge pay cut. And basically, my wife almost had a nervous breakdown, walk away from the benefits and the really great salary I had, and kind of just jump off. And it all started with an intuitive message I got when we were in Lake Tahoe. And it was really like, you know, the whispers you get, but the whisper became the shout. And it was like, you need to quit your job. I thought I was actually in line to be the successor to the CEO at this organization. Like I said, nationally ranked. At this point, Mark Zuckerberg has actually given them hundreds of millions of dollars. So talk about the form-based world I walked away from.
Wow, that's a lot of form. It takes a lot of formlessness to get there.
Exactly. So when I got the shout in Tahoe, it was like, you have to start an elementary school. I'd always worked in 6 through 12. My kids were young. And so I started a K-8. And the reason I started this school is I felt like I had to get back to the grassroots, and I had to get back to figuring out how to build communities together, and that we had lost that at my previous organization because it was just getting so big. And nothing against them, but for me, the work I was doing was not on the ground with the community. So I want to get back with the community, and my wife's from Sacramento, so we moved out here to get away from the hustle and bustle of the Bay Area. And I really did kind of, you know, I went from being the guy that had multiple assistants and multiple people working for me to the guy that was then in a coffee shop for 3 hours with one mom trying to convince her to enroll in my school.
That's amazing. But then, you know, that's the age you get them. I always say with kids, we can't always impact what's happening at home because we're not there. Yeah. But K-8 stage, that is where we can reinforce the belief in them, you know, reinforce the authenticity, invite them into a system that supports them. So I think, you know, it's amazing that you came up with that.
Yeah, and then the you know, universe again is so precise. It was about a year later that I joined Europe Manifestation, and that's where we met in the Shapali course. And she said in the first class, like, you won't be the same person at the end. And I'm like, she wasn't kidding. So yeah, after the end of the first year of the school, I got Bell's palsy, which is where your face is paralyzed, paralysis of the face. Like an inner ear, it feels like someone's stabbing you in the ear. Nobody knows why you get it. The medical world thinks it's because of like if you have the virus, but it's really like Adyashanti and a lot of other spiritual teachers have had Bell's palsy. So it's basically your nervous system is freaking out because you're coming home, and it's like doing everything in its power to make sure that you don't evolve. So yeah, so I got Bell's palsy, and I realized that I needed to, that the school system, that I really knew I had a big mission to change the school system, but I also knew I had to sit back and do some real deep work on myself.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing the last 3 years. So now I'm ready.
Yes, I can
the
see
next,
that. And now,
phase.
through your spiritual growth and also your health and your experience, you can really help us redefine what we think as education. And I think for me, it's not even reimagining it as much. I think the reimagining it is the fun part. It's where we say, let's do it this way. We've all been conditioned to believe that the best education we can give our children is to send them to school, sit in a class, be taught in the same way. They're all sheep. They all have to take standardized tests. There's a bar they all have to make it to. And if you don't make it to that, you're screwed. And back to what you said earlier, you said, okay, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to graduate, and then I'm going to make it. And that's what we teach our children, that's all they are. We're going to send them to a school. They're going to be sheep. I use the word sheep because, Michael Beckwith, I connect with Michael Beckwith.
Big fan. Oh, huge fan. I love him. He's my favorite.
And that a lot. And every time he calls this sheep mentality, I'm like, yes, I'm in. So I feel like as somebody who has knowingly put my children in a school system that I have never been comfortable in, I've questioned from day one, and out of not just stubbornness, but inability to send my kid to a private school. Do I save for a future? Do I send my 5-year-old to a private school, and then the next kid, and where do you draw the line? Is that I just feel like for many, many, many of us, and this is a global issue.
Oh, absolutely.
We've been conditioned to think, and this is why your live yesterday was just fantastic. That factory mindset.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It blew my mind because it resonated with the conditioning that I feel with the education system. We're telling our children, you're going to go sit in a class of somewhere between 18, sometimes to 40 kids, because it's happened to my kid. And you're going to learn exactly at the same pace, same material, as if it's all the same. And you don't make it at the end. Should have worked hard, should have done it, the end. So how do we redefine this, David? How do we show parents that, first of all, that definition is not right? It's not right by our children.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I literally, like, so many things are coming all at once. I'm like, my brain can't keep up with my intuition.
Go for it. Unleash it all.
No, so I think the first thing is when I started my K-8, which is now in its going into its 4th year, there were a set of principles that I felt incredibly strongly about.
I think you might be a little frozen, David. Let me know if you hear me, and we will continue until you're reconnected.
We built my previous charter organization. There's examples of these, the Sudbury schools, the Montessori schools, the democratic schools. There's small examples of these.
David, are you back? Okay, you're back.
Should I just go back up like a minute?
Yeah, just start again.
Okay, so the learner-centered principles around giving the kid agency, right now the whole system is very hierarchical. It's very 20th century, actually 19th century. And it's all about the factory model, like we talked about. And it's all about, it's really about the adults, and even the teachers are very disempowered. But when you're in a classroom, the teachers, it's about the teacher and it's not about the kids. Not always, but that's how the system's built. So when I built Growth Public Schools, I wanted to take what I had learned from my previous organization and actually build out these learner-centered principles. Through my spiritual journey, what I've learned is that the most important thing is actually that it's heart-centered.
Yes.
Because if you start there, that's the heart of everything. That's the center of everything, is we have to actually create schools that are heart-centered. And as you mentioned, there's a massive issue with the social paradigm, because we're trying to create these sheep. And if you think about the factory model, it's about widgets and it's about organizing, and a few of them go to college, and and it's actually was built around the kind of 20th century management science, where there's different layers and hierarchy and bureaucracy and all that. So people are trying to break out of this. And what I learned quickly was, because I started a public charter school, not all, but a lot of my ideas were actually beaten down by the system, because you have to get approved by an entity to get the state funding. So what I decided was, in this last journey, as I was really tapping into intuition, is that this has to be a movement. It's going to be a movement, and it has to be, everyone has to come together and actually organize around a set of these principles. And the thing that's crazy right now is, for those of us that have been calling for education reform, the universe is like hitting us upside the head with a 2x4 and saying, like, you wanted it and now you got it.
This is the moment.
This is the moment. But what I'm seeing, and it's totally understandable, because I'm going through it too, just to add, I do have a almost 7-year-old, almost 10-year-old that are enrolled in my charter school, but we're not sure we're going to keep them there. And is that sorry, I forgot what I was going to say, because I was trying to think of my kids. I had a good point though. What was it?
No, sorry, you were saying that your children go to your charter school, but that the pandemic, just before that, you were saying the pandemic
yes.
has given us the opportunity for
Yes.
those of us that want
Yes.
reform,
Yes.
those of us that that want reform to really take
Yes.
a moment.
Yes, and what I was going to say is that people are in fear, which is understandable, because we have bought the conditioning that you have to put your kid in a certain type of school and they have to go to a certain type of university. And I think what I'm like calling and pleading for is that this is a movement to show other people the way, and it's going to be led by the people that are on the spiritual journey that can really pick through the conditioning and say, there's something much bigger here than my kid going to, I'm not even saying Harvard, just college in general.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be college. There's something bigger here than, like, we just really have to ask ourselves about this moment and say, this is a great time of change, like Michael Beckwith talks about, and the tables are being turned upside down. So everything has to be on the table. I didn't mean, the table's upside down now, but everything has to be available, and we have to live in infinite possibilities and say, there are so many ways to solve this problem. And so my latest kind of what's coming through me is that there has to be a movement, which I have been called to be the ambassador for this movement, around these heart-centered schools.
Yeah.
And I feel like literally this moment today, where majority of the districts across the country in the US, and I'm assuming a lot of other countries, are closed, this is our opportunity to really totally let go of the fear and ask ourselves, if we could dream of what we want our children to do every single day and what we want them to experience and the feelings we want them to have, and let's create that.
Yes, I mean, a lot of families in my neighborhood are creating little pods where their kids are learning together. And that's, I think it's a step forward, but it's not far enough. I think that the creation of the pods is still to figure out how the kids can take advantage of virtual schooling.
Yes.
Online. And I'm thinking, how do we go further than that?
Yes.
How do we give them that, okay, maybe we combine it, maybe we make a little virtual school because they need that, or we want them to have that curriculum. How do we use other aspects of education into their life? It's almost like, I feel like it's a concoction of unschooling, school.
Yes, yes.
There's an element of schooling, because when we talk about spiritual movements and we talk about the spiritual and heart-centered approach to education, I want anyone listening to remember, we're not asking for our children to do nothing, to come home and disregard formal education. And we have to still play with the form and the formless. We have to prepare our children for the form world. And as we prepare them for the form world, how do we, though, incorporate a lot of their authenticity and ensure that we're honoring them in the process? It's not about just diffusing everything. It's almost like that word I really can't stand right now, the defunding police and how it's so misinterpreted.
Yeah.
And then, there's a whole big overreaction on the other side. What I'm calling people to the table to hear what David is really saying is that how do we still educate our children, but redefine and reimagine an education that benefits them?
Yes. And in order to do that, so yes, that's the question. And in order to do that, we have to ask ourselves at every moment what conditioning is coming in. So for example, as the dad who considers myself, conscious as much as possible, not all the time, but the person that's like doing the work and so conscious, blah, blah, blah. And then my daughter is struggling with reading, and we decided not to do the schoolwork in April. Like we did it for about 3 weeks and I realized it was ruining our house. And I just said, okay, like I'm asking everyone to do right now. I told my wife, I said, and she can sometimes get more into the, like the rules and all that. So I said, what is the experience and the feeling and the energy we want in our house every single moment of every single day? Like what's the vision for what we want to do? And she was like, oh, but the teacher's sending home the worksheets. And I was like, is that the vision? We want them doing worksheets 3 hours a day. Like I was trying not to be a jerk, but I was like, what is the vision? And so we decided that the vision was to be deeply connected with our children, to give them as much social interaction as humanly possible, whether it's like through GChat or maybe like co-quarantining with 1 or 2 families, whatever, some version of socializing, and that we wanted them to feel to be in their essence as much as possible. And we wanted them to learn how to understand their intuition, like all the things that we all, not we all, but a lot of us believe in, that's probably that are watching this. And we decided just to try that. And then the one fear that both of us had, but a lot of times it was my wife, was that my daughter wouldn't be able to read because my wife struggled with reading when she was in first grade. It always starts there. And so we were nervous about that. And now it's been 4 months, 5 months since we stopped doing any schoolwork. And guess what happened yesterday morning? I picked up a book and she just read the whole entire thing, like no pauses, no problems. And I was like, Waldorf people, you're probably laughing at me right now because this is their whole philosophy. So I think that it's like sticking to the principles and asking yourself, what are you conditioned to believe? And just moving in that direction a little bit at a time. And the reason I started Heart of the Matter is because it was definitely divinely guided. Like I would much rather just sit here and run my one school and raise my family. Much easier life. And not talk about Black Lives Matter. Be like, whatever, I live in a nice neighborhood, I don't care. But now that this moment has come, it's like, oh yeah, that's not what I'm doing. Like I'm being called to start a movement that will really amplify and highlight these different models across the world. So that for the people that are scared, or the people that can't really see that other picture, that other angle, will start to, what they can do is feel. So if they can see a video of the kids doing what we just said, like the energy behind the video of the kids feeling really connected and all of that, and if they can see that, they're going to be like, wait, why am I not doing this? And then you can start to connect people across the world. They're like, oh, we're all going to do X, Y, and Z in our community. Why don't you, you're over in New Zealand, why don't you try it? And then we can, Heart of the Matter can provide a space where people can connect around these principles, around like letting go of the fear. And then it'll just become the ripple effect, like Shefali talks about. It's like one at a time, a little bit at a time. And I told this story, but when we had our meeting last week with about 10 of us in the Heart of the Matter, and I was like, I left and I was like, these 10 people alone could change the face of education. Like, the vibration was so high, and the consciousness was just like, I made that joke, remember, I was like, you guys are blinding me, it's so bright in here right now. And so I feel like if we can just unleash people like you and others and just give them the tools to start to create the change, and then they can bring along people in their neighborhood and they can start talking about it in a different way. It's totally possible. And the universe is like really, really shouting at us to do this. Like you don't, there's no going back. And we're all saying that we don't want our kids in the factory models, but now we're all freaking out that we don't get to take them back there in 3 weeks.
Isn't that interesting, right? We complained about the system forever, but then, and now we're devastated that our kids are not in it. And I think here's one thing that a lot of parents do not realize, David. My younger daughter is more of she's goal-oriented, she's a planner, kids are just different. And I remember that last month of school was done.
Yeah.
She was
Yeah.
exhausted. She was bored. She was uninspired. And I
Yep.
would say, no, so don't do the work. I'd say, and I said, don't do it. I'll explain it to the teacher. I'll say, listen, my kid's, she's reached her max. And do you know what her response was? No, mommy, I can't.
Yeah. So yeah. How old is she?
She's 11.
11. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go. She's 11.
And she wouldn't. She would not listen to me. I was the one
Yeah.
that said, I don't care if you don't do this. I will write to the teacher. I actually eventually wrote to the teacher and she said, okay, I'll take one day off.
Yeah.
And her teacher, if he will corroborate it. I wrote to her
Yeah.
and I said, listen, I told my daughter she could take the week off just to cover, or even a couple of weeks off. And she said, look, whatever you need, let me know. My kid would not take more than a day off.
Yeah.
So we've actually conditioned our children.
But we have to create the environment and the soil for them to not be conditioned in this way. So what I can tell you with 100% certainty, way before I did all this deep spiritual work, is that I would always tell the story about our charter schools in the Bay Area, and we'd have to go in front of the school district to get renewed every 5 years. I always say it's like Netflix has to go to the cable company to ask you to give them permission to keep going. It's like, really?
Yeah.
So it was always very contentious. But one of the things we would do is bring our special ed students, the ones that were in middle schools where they didn't do very well. And we have them talk for the 2 minutes, right, to the school board. And they would basically say, I have never been held to high expectations my whole entire school career. I've never been in an environment where people actually love me every single day. I've never been in a place where I'm not labeled. I've never been in a place where I get to go to be in the same classes with the same kids and we're all friends. And and they were basically, I'm getting chills right now sharing it, because when you create an environment for kids, they're already the most divine beings on the planet. So your daughter's 11. If you would put her in not that this is, not giving you regret. I know you won't have regret, but like, imagine if she had been in this type of school since age 4, she'd be like, wait, what? You want me to keep doing work when it's totally against every grain in my being? Like, they would be confused, right? And so that's what we saw with our charter schools. Is like, once you create the environment for the growth and the learning and the way, it's just, so it's changing the way kids are educated. And the example of that is my son was in a Montessori preschool, a beautiful school. And I tried to build my K-8 around the Montessori principles, but the bureaucrats tore it apart. They would have none of it. So to get it approved, I had to just keep diluting. But when my son was in Montessori, I mean, it was like, my kid was so happy. It was all about self-direction. It was all about like meeting the child where they are. It was believing that they could choose, it literally, I always joke, like if Horace Mann, who kind of created our education system in the US, if Horace Mann and Maria Montessori had, duked it out in a debate and she had won, you and I would not be having this conversation right now. Like, it would be a different world.
And kids mirror one another, they listen to each other, they want to do what the other kids are doing. And you can see that despite the environment we've created in my own home, my kid wanted to mirror her peers. She wanted to be part of the sheep mentality.
Yeah.
But when she's done, she's like, mommy, why do I do this again? This education is not for me. She just knows. I'm excited to share this actually with everyone who's still watching. So David has amazing ideas. And one of the ideas that's actually unfolding right now, I am trying to figure out what piece I can contribute to. And if you will have me, I'll come back to you, is that David is engaging educators right now as we speak. He's working with art teachers. He's working with teachers who can teach children remotely during the pandemic. And I think you're creating like not a micro school, because you don't need a license for this. You just this. The pandemic has created an opportunity for us to school and educate our children in a slightly different way than we have done before. So, David, I wanted you to just share that. And if any parents watching are interested, I'm going to include David's parenting group link on here. And David is already tagged. Just join Heart of the Matter, because then you can see the whole thing unfold.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So one of the things that was really coming through this morning as I was thinking about this talk is that I've been getting these messages, these downloads for 3 years. And what I always get is it's a decentralized movement led by the people on the ground, the teachers, the students, the parents. And so this moment, and I'm like, I woke up this morning, I had written, you won't be able to see it, but I had like written this 3 years ago. And it's basically a download that I got, and I just started writing it, and it's one of the things, and I'd written this before, is that there's something that I'm involved with like 1,000 schools. And the mind was like, that's so overwhelming. But what I'm realizing now is it's probably some version of this kind of like micro school, co-op school. I'm not even calling it a micro school because, like you said, that's like a whole kind of bureaucratic, or there's all these licenses and everything. But we'll come up with a name. You got to come up with new names.
I kept calling it COVID schooling, and then I realized, okay, no, that's not going to work either.
Yeah, so we'll come up with a good name. I mean, and now I'm hearing pods. There's all these things coming out, and I did share a New York Times article.
I like that, pod schooling.
Pod schooling, yeah. And that was one of the things I had really thought about with my charter school before they didn't let me go up. It was like having different pods. Anyway, let me stay focused. So basically this idea is giving us the moment to be very decentralized and to start working within the system, but outside of the system. So the other really important thing that I want to bring in is that when I tell the story that I decided not to do the schoolwork, my wife always reminds me, oh yeah, good job, white man. Like basically like just saying, well, I don't want to do the schoolwork. And they're like, you're the freaking founder. Do you think the teachers are going to argue with you? You know? And I'm like, no, but I'm going to give them a model of what I think we should be doing right now. But I say this because I think as I talk about this idea, I'm starting to get obsessed with the missing piece of the equity piece. So that's something that I'm going to weave in as I talk about this idea. But this idea is, and it's already naturally happening, and it's very decentralized, is that you get groups of parents together. And I'm just going to break this down simply, and there's infinite possibilities. But let's just talk about this like one idea. I have one idea that a lot of people have, which is 5 families, figure out how to co-quarantine. There's a little bit of risk there because you're, mixing and this and that. But if you're going back to school, it's less risk than that.
Yeah.
So you come up with some social contract, whatever. Hire a teacher or a tutor that can work with your kids to do the schoolwork that comes through the distance learning. So like your kids will probably be in like a virtual, like a lot of us, through the teacher, Zoom calls, this and that. And it gives the parents a little break from the 24/7. And it also allows like either a tutor or an actual certified teacher to sit with a group of 5, which is like a dream come true for any teacher. We all want 1-to-1. That's our dream as teachers. But if we could have 5-to-1 all day, I'd love that. A lot of their homeschool studies show that about 2 hours a day for like K to 5, 1 to 2 hours is actually academic time. So you are able to you're able to have that tutor come in for 1 to 2 hours a day, which gives parents, usually it's moms, the break from the kind of pressure cooker of trying to get the kids to, do the worksheet or do whatever. So you're just able to kind of like outsource that piece. Then you allow all these people that are out of work. I don't know how many people I've talked to in the Shefali group that are in their 40s are like, I always wanted to be a teacher. I'm like, well, now's your chance. Go ask somebody to pay you and go, all these conscious parent coaches, go sit with kids for, you don't have to be a trained teacher to help them figure out how to. Sometimes it's just having someone who's not the parent talk to them about how to go through the work, right? Because the teacher's already giving them the lessons and all that, right? Through the virtual. Okay, so then you do that a couple hours a day. You pool the resources with your families and with the other families. And then the other 22 hours out of the day, create the school that we're talking about. Have them do art with like Lily Kim in South Korea, have her come on virtually, have them do,
a language
in the backyard, Duolingo, like whatever you believe in as your family, make it happen. You have 22 hours a day. Not that simple, but there's a lot of time where you're like, because what we found in the spring is, let's just play with the kids. I was like, just throw all the worksheets away and let's just play. And that's what we did. And then we had to create some structure because it was like insane. And my homeschool friends explained to me, you need some version of structure. Like, you can't just willy-nilly. Like, kids need to feel safe in it. So, there's like a rhythm. One of my friends, Renee, who did the Shefali group, Renee Deller, she talks about how, you have a rhythm. It's like 2-hour blocks of this, an hour block of this. So any homeschool families are gonna be like, yeah, that's basic to us. But anyway, so that's the idea. And then the other idea I had is that you could start bringing in the best teachers in a subject virtually into your living room. And then you could, again, collaborate, put this money together, pool the money, and say like, oh, we all want to find somebody who does meditation for kids. Amanda Votto, I think her name is.
Yeah.
Her name? Mindfulness for Kids. I don't know her that well, but I know she's, Connie Messenger, like other folks that we know from the Shefali classes. Yeah. They can come in and do like mindfulness.
Meditation with kids as well. She's also
they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Barbie was a teacher, So there's so many folks that could come in and do short little things, or they could do movement, they could do yoga, all these things that we all just love to death, right? And we want our kids to be exposed, but the moment we try and do it, they're like, no. If I say the word Dr. Shafali, my kids run the other direction. They're like, oh, Dr. Shafali. So anyway, so that's kind of the basic idea. The part that I'm thinking about a lot today is that's a very elitist.
Yes.
That works for people that have the resources and the social capital and the means to hire a teacher, pay a teacher, figure out how to, push back on the school. One of the things I really want to say, and my educator friends are going to be really annoyed with me, but please, for those of you listening that do have the social capital, push back on the school. Do it nicely, do it in the very, what we've all learned, do it kindly, but just say no. Just say no. And get as many parents as you can together and say no. We'll do X, Y, and Z, because it's not the teacher. It's the administration that's reflecting what the parents are probably saying in most affluent communities. We need the homework, we need this. So anyway, I would encourage people to have the courage to say, we're trying out this pod schooling.
Yeah.
We're going to spend 2 hours a day, because Delia, who's in our group, Delia Rumbao, I think her name is, she was saying in her affluent community, she thinks they're going to give her her kids 8 hours of work a day. And I'm like, just say no. But I know it's not that simple, because then you don't get the credits on that. But at least try.
Enough of us are able to say no, then it should work. And also,
Yes.
Another thing I was thinking when I was looking at the reopening plan for our neighboring borough in Florida, teachers are going to be extremely stressed out. And,
they're so stressed.
Last night it just came to me and I said, you know what, I'm going to start recording some meditations. I'm going to record them and teachers and say, okay, this is something as a gift to the teachers. We can get enough of us together and record meditations for children, especially that don't have the resources.
Yes.
Have mindfulness tools. We can record mini mindfulness classes and donate an hour each and curate a little mindfulness program.
Absolutely.
That we can each provide to our neighborhood kids that need it the most.
Absolutely.
There are ways to help out there, and there are many people willing to donate an hour a week to teach a disadvantaged child art or music.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing these articles that I told you about, like the New York Times and LA Times, and one article is saying there's 3,000 parents in a Facebook group trying to figure this out. But here's what I would really put out to who's listening to is, let's do this in a conscious way.
Yes.
Because what's going to happen is, someone said to me the other day, the problem with homeschooling a lot of times is that people take the unconscious schooling that we're doing and then do an unconscious homeschooling version.
Correct.
So what's going to happen in these other Facebook groups, I think, I'm not saying for sure, but what I can imagine, I know I'm making an assumption though, is that they're going to try and do school with it just even worse because the teacher's not in the room. And
it has to be heart-centered, it has to be child-centric, and it has to be led from a place of consciousness.
Absolutely.
There can be no ego. There can be, this is not for us. No. This is not about us. This is about the children.
Yeah, and your audience or people that are listening in this group, I know a lot of them, please, we need you to lead the way, because this is a collective movement.
Yeah.
And it's like the ripple effect can be so strong. I'm telling you, the 10 people that I saw, there's 100 in Heart of the Matter, then it becomes 1,000, then it becomes, and it's highly conscious. And that will allow people to feel safe in doing things differently when people like us are really trying to lead the way. That said, I did have a download this morning that we need to create a system for, because they were talking in this New York Times article about, I think they specifically talked about Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, which is, I just visited a really great charter school there last February, right before the pandemic. And it was a classic kind of gentrifying neighborhood, but there's still tons of families that can't afford it. And it just made me think about those families and how we have to create a nonprofit or some place where we can solve two very simple problems. Find them a teacher and get them funds to pay the teacher.
Yeah.
All these Facebook groups that are organizing, let's ask each of them to give 10%. We can leverage the white guilt. Give 10%. Everyone's feeling guilty. Give 10% to families that can't afford a teacher, and then just find a way to get them a teacher. in their community. They can take care of the rest,
Yeah.
right? Like they can organize their groups, they can do everything, but like, but I just, whenever we're talking about these pod schools, I don't want us to forget that those of us that have the means can just act like this is the solution and there's no problem.
Yeah, I think those of us that have the means and are fortunate enough to reimagine a different way should also be in a position to imagine a way that we can contribute.
Yes.
The have-nots and the kids that need it and cannot have it. I think that
Yes.
there's a lot to be said for service, and
Yes.
I would absolutely love to be a part of a committee to curate something. We can record a small, a course that maybe we can generate income by selling that to those who can.
Exactly.
But also by donating it to the families that need it.
Yes, and not doing the white savior thing. Sorry, I'm not perfect, just to be very clear. I have a lot of the problems that I'm projecting out, but like, please, let's not do the white savior thing where we own the money and we take care of this and we think that we're going to save them. No, it's like
literally it's a way to fund anything we can do to make a difference. Yes. And I think many of us honestly would be, I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to structure it, and then I'm going to create it and the vision, and then put it out there, for your input and for everybody else's input. David, I have loved talking to you. I always give anyone I speak to the last few moments to connect. And what would you like to say to everyone that's listening right now? What do you want their takeaway to be today?
Okay, this is just like going to come straight from source. I just felt it. Okay, so it's basically like, this is the moment. This is the moment. It's a time of great change. This is not about me. It's not about you. We are all one. That's like really obvious, right? At this moment. And so when we're in the fear, when we're stuck in our mind and all the limited possibilities, that just really open up your heart and let source do its work. Let spirit do its work. Surrender to this moment that we have been gifted, no matter, even though it's super difficult and there's a lot of pain, there is a moment that we can literally, no doubt in my mind, change the face of education in the world forever. When our kids are, I just got the chills, when our kids are 25, 30, they're gonna laugh that we even thought sending them to factory models was something that we did. Kind of like the way things are changing with, gender fluidity and these kind of things that our kids are leading, and they're like, you guys are lame. Why are you even talking about this? Like, there's gender fluidity, right? It's going to be like that in 20 years. They're going to be like, oh, your generation was so silly. Why are you doing these factory things where it's all about the grades and the tests and it took you so long? And they're just going to be laughing at us. So, and I think that let's get out of the way of the kids. Let's create the environment. That's exactly what Heart of the Matter is being born for. It's not about me coming up with all the ideas. It's about having these conversations and having you say, oh my gosh, I'm going to help this nonprofit idea or whatever. It's coming together and it's solving this problem totally collectively. It's not this top-down stuff where there's multiple bureaucrats and all. That's not where we are anymore. If you listen to Marianne Williamson during her presidency campaign, like, that's all she ever talked about. There's a new era of leadership. There's a new era, and then COVID hit, and it's like there's nothing else to talk about anymore. It's just, don't think, tap into the source, tap into your intuition, trust yourself. And anytime you see that ego peeking in and saying that, our kids aren't going to go to college or this is all going to fall apart, just know that not only do we have to change it, but this group, people that have done the work, will be the ones who change it. There's no other way. It's not going to change unconsciously. It's not going to change.
Yes, absolutely. I love it, David. Thank you so much. And as everyone that knows me knows, when I started this page, I had said, yes, this is a very difficult time. People have struggled. People have lost their jobs. People have been impacted. Some people lost their loved ones. But if we can come out of this, the other side, and we have not learned from it, we haven't grown from this, what's the point? So this is a moment for growth. This is a moment to reinvent, reimagine, redefine. And as far as education, you're in good hands. This is David Richards. Please join his parenting group. I'm Heart of the Matter. It's not just about parenting, but it's really about raising a generation of children that will be educated in a way that honors them and the future. This is not to say they will not have a good education. They will have a phenomenal education.
Exactly. Beyond anything the mind could ever imagine.
Yes, yes, you heard from the source, directly from David. Oh, I should say directly through David.
Thank you. I was gonna say, it's not about me.
um, keep watching. David and I will be talking a lot in the few weeks.
I know we will. I know we will.
Whether it's on Heart of the Matter or here, we'll be talking, we'll be elevating our conversation and our energy, and join us. Thank you very much.
Today is the day, and today is the day where it changed. I'm telling you that right now. I woke up and I was like, oh, today's the day. Okay, great. It's today. So thank you for being with me and shepherding this through and giving me the opportunity to speak a lot of the things that are coming through me. I really, really am tremendously grateful. So thank you.
Same here. I'm very grateful and thank you.